everyone. My guest for this episode is Virginia Kluiters, a New York City-based fashion and beauty photographer. Her work has been published in magazines such as Archive, Elements, Dreamingless, Vulkan, and many more. She's also had other photography and writing work in publications like Brandon Magazine and Colonnades Literary and Art Journal, as well as many past exhibitions of herself. You can view her work on her Instagram at Kluiters photo and her website virginiakluiters.com. So yeah, you're a second guest on the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I know it's like still a little scary to come out and be places physically, but thank you so much for
Of
being
course.
able to make
Yes.
it.
Yes.
When you first moved to NYC, I know that you worked in the industry as a creative copywriter and production and photography assistant. What did that consist of?
I did. So when I first moved here, it was right after college. I moved to the city, and I really was pursuing photography, and I wanted to know the best way to get into the photo industry, and it is, of course, to assist and meet other photographers who've been in the industry a while and who are working professionals. So I was hired at a small content creation agency, and at first I was assisting and helping out on photo shoots and that sort of thing. But eventually they were like, we really need a copywriter to help us out with our clients, to actually write for our brands and write for Instagram and create copy for their marketing purposes. And I said, well, I have a dual degree. I did English and also fine art, so I can write. So I started doing copywriting for them. And then from there, I did professional copywriting, creative copywriting for a couple years.
So so photography wasn't always just a hobby. It was something you were consciously wanting to go into.
It started off as a hobby, when I first started shooting when I was pretty young. I had an old point and shoot Sony camera that was my dad's. And I just started messing around with it when I was really in middle school.
And you're like, oh my gosh, this is it.
Yeah, I was like, this is fun. And I started taking pictures of myself, just using the timer and that sort of thing, in my backyard. Not even with a tripod. I just put it on the back of his truck or whatever, and just stand in front of the camera and just mess around with it. And I had fun with that. And then as I got older, I started becoming more and more interested in photography. And in college, I ended up majoring in fine art, and my medium was photography.
Okay. So when did you really feel like you were like, this is it, I'm doing photography full time?
Yeah, it's funny because I moved to New York expecting that that's what I was going to do. And I think when I got here, I really wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared fully for how competitive it is. It's the most competitive city, one of the most in the country, probably the world. And I'm from South Carolina. I'd gone to school in North Carolina. It's pretty different. So I really wasn't ready. And I wasn't mentally prepared, I would say. I had to do some growing up, some finding myself. I really needed more experience, I feel like in the industry. And even getting into copywriting really helped me with that, because I saw the way the beauty and fashion industries work from multiple perspectives that way. And after taking sort of a break from photography, where I really didn't shoot very much for a year or two, I picked up a camera again one day because I had this urge to start shooting again. And my background is self-portraiture, and really that was a very healing thing for me. I think you read some on my website about my past work, and I just had this need to do it again. So I started taking self-portraits again, and I always was very interested in fashion, though, specifically because I see a big overlap with fashion photography and with fine art photography. Fashion photography is one of the most creative forms of photography that you can also do as a career and make some money from, and really go into as a field, a professional field.
Doing art, but also being able to live off of it.
It's sort of the perfect harmony, or I saw it that way. Yeah. So after doing the self-portraiture for a little while, I was like, I need to get back into fashion. I want to start this again. Right. So I literally had no portfolio, whatsoever. No fashion portfolio. I had a lot of fine art work from college and that sort of thing. So I started reaching out to models on Instagram, and I started networking just all on Instagram or occasionally emailing people. And a lot of people didn't answer me or like weren't interested or whatever. But a few people did take a chance on me, which was good, and decided to collaborate with me. And I just like dove like literally headfirst into it and started shooting all the time, like constantly.
Did you ever have like people you worked with when you were in copywriting that were able to help you sort of enter photography, or was it really just on your own mostly?
You know, it's funny because when I started working in New York, before I went into like beauty copywriting like full time and doing that, I was freelance with that for like a year or two. When I was working at that production company, there were a couple photographers there who I connected with. And I didn't really see them that much for like a year or so when I was doing my full-time copywriting thing. But we reconnected after like a year or two. And we started working together. And they were a really good support for me. I have to shout out Derek Marquez, who's like a very talented photographer living in New York City. And we really like started talking and like kind of helped each other out. And you know, I would assist him some and help him, and he'd assist me some on shoots, and we'd talk about equipment and that sort of thing. And having that point of contact or someone else who's sort of like, who's in the industry, he's been in the industry like much longer than me, it really helps a lot to just kind of know what it looks like and what you're doing. And it's a really good source of support.
I feel like a lot of people think that they have to reach out to like, I don't know, the most like the top people, but it's like, no, you usually just, you could get the same help from someone who's just been around for
absolutely.
a long time.
And I feel like, of course, like there's definitely something really awesome about working with like a famous photographer. Like I wouldn't say no to that if I got an assisting job at, you know, or something with a very famous photographer. That would be an amazing opportunity. But I do think that what's really important also is getting to know the people at like your same level or who are like, you know, growing or going places that you also want to go, and then getting to know them, and then you all move up together. And ideally, like one day, all of you are succeeding and like building each other up. That's the way I see it, at least. I feel like there's a really competitive like attitude in photography. I'm sure you get the same in like the fashion industry and, you know, that sort of thing. But where people just like don't really want each other to succeed. It's like, oh, there's not enough room for like too many people at the top, or, you know, like you can't have too many women or like too many people of color at the top or whatever. And I feel like that's a really problematic attitude, because really like we should be building each other up and like uplifting one another.
Definitely. Yeah, I do feel like that's something that I'm on my second semester, my second year, my third semester, and I have felt that is like a big attitude that a lot of people have, that's sort of like, oh no, I invite her, maybe she'll be the one that ends up getting like the job, so no, maybe I'm not gonna.
Exactly.
If she gets the job, she could just bring you in later on. You know
exactly. Yeah, it's hard to not feel like some jealousy when someone obviously is like, you see them as like succeeding more than you or something like that. But it's important to remember that like these people who are moving up, or it's actually, I mean,
it's like they
you want to see the people. Exactly.
And like it's just nice to see people that you know personally like
doing well and succeeding. It gives me hope. Like when I see people who I know that are like getting these opportunities, I think, oh, well, like I'll have that opportunity too one day.
Yeah. Like I see my friends who get like modeling jobs for like big companies or like near. I'm like,
you have to cheer them on. Exactly. Like I feel like that's really what it's about, because photography especially, and I think a lot of the fashion industry too, and the beauty industries, it's very collaborative. Like anything creative is really like pretty collaborative. Like you have to work together. You have teams. It's all about building your teams and like building your connections. And I feel like in order to do that, you really have to find people who you truly connect with, and you have to support each other and have a mutual relationship that grows stronger with time.
Right. And it's also like be nice to everyone, because you do see people more than once.
Oh,
you definitely do see them again.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like that is so true. Like there's times when I've worked with people and I think like, oh, I probably won't ever like see them around again, and then like on the next job they're there.
Like, oh my god, hi, yeah.
Exactly. And like so it really is very small. It's pretty close knit, especially when you find your circle of like peers, I guess, that you work with and that you shoot with, or, that you do things with. Those people start showing up again and again, but it's amazing because then you meet other people through your peers, and like that's building a network, right? And that's what it's really about.
Why did you choose to remain in like the fashion and beauty industry? Like, why didn't you want to like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes the vibe and attitude of the industry can be a little hard on people, and like it could throw you off a little bit. Like, why did you stay?
So, the what? Sorry, what was that?
Why did you choose to stay in the beauty and fashion industry?
Yeah, because you're saying it can be hard, and
it can be a little hard.
Yeah, exactly. No, I totally agree with that. It can be very challenging, and it's funny. I feel like I have like this need, like this drive to do it. That's a good question, because I don't know whether it's just like my need to prove to myself that I can do it. I do love it. So obviously like that comes into play too. It's like, I would say fashion photography is one of my passions, and I love beauty photography too, because of the room for creativity and because it's such an interesting career. There's not really anything else I can think of that for me has felt the same way when I'm doing it. Like I loved copywriting. It was also very fun, but I feel like there wasn't quite as much room for creativity, and there also isn't as much room to network and to meet people, because it's pretty solo. You're like in a room with a computer writing. Whereas photography, it's really about human connection, because you're connecting with your team members, but you're also connecting with the model and the person on the other side of the camera. And that's something that's really unique. And that feeling is something I've never found anywhere else. And part of it too, I think, is that creative drive, that drive to create something visual that I have. And I've really always had since I was a kid.
Right. Yeah. With the team, it sort of feels like when you see like the edited pictures, like the final product, like we had a child together. This is what
exactly.
we did.
That's literally what it feels like. It feels like you gave birth.
Like, this is our baby. Yeah.
This is my baby. And that's why it can be so hard. Like you were saying, not just, there's tons of reasons it's difficult, but one reason is that it is so personal. And I read something once that said they say if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But the truth is, like, if you do what you love, you'll, love it, but you'll take everything super personally and get really offended when people don't like what you do.
Right. Exactly.
And that's kind of true to some extent, because it is like your baby, you're protective over it. And I think shedding that sort of ego, or shedding that need to, I guess, see everything you do as perfect is really important as an artist, and as a photographer, really, but in all the arts, because then you have room for growth, and you can recognize what you're not doing well, what you can do better,
and also sort of just thing. Overall, not everyone's gonna like it. People, there's always gonna be someone that's gonna like it.
Oh, absolutely.
Always gonna be someone that's gonna like it. So it's kind of it's not personal. Maybe they're just not into this sort of thing.
Totally.
So not take it too close to the heart. But,
it's funny. I had this roommate who he was. His name's Austin Henderson, and he lived in Nashville for a while, but he's a great singer-songwriter. And he once said to me, not everything you produce, he said, let me start over. Not everything you see you're going to like, and that's okay, because it's not for you.
Right.
If you don't like something, you have to approach it basically from sort of an outside standpoint, where you're not fully you can understand that it's not fully meant for you, and that art was produced for someone else. It will appeal to someone else. Just because you don't like something, basically, doesn't mean it's not good. Yeah. And I think it's important for us to recognize that when we're looking at other people's work too. So I try not to be super judgmental when I see other people's art that maybe I don't immediately like, because maybe I just don't get it. Maybe it's not for me. I thought that was a really important thing to think about.
Right. So you have 3 photography series. The ongoing one that's called What He Left Behind, dealing with effects of abuse in romantic relationships. Where I Rest My Bones, dealing with the complicated relationship you have with your hometown of Columbia, South Carolina. and Reframing History, where you projected classical paintings onto your subjects. Like, can you talk to us a little bit about the inspiration behind these?
Yeah, so the Reframing History is my oldest body of work, and that was actually done when I was in college. It was my senior thesis. Okay. And that's sort of, I would say, what actually locked in like my love for photography. I always loved it, but really that series was very healing. That kind of started, I guess, these series of personal projects I've been doing, where I wanted to deal with like some of the lasting effects I had from toxic relationships of the past and abusive relationships of the past that really had stuck with me for years and I'd never fully healed or gotten over. And one of the best ways to do that for me, and actually I think for a lot of people, is through art therapy, really. And I basically took my thesis like project in college, my senior year of college, as the opportunity to engage in this art making process that like I saw as healing myself. The idea behind it was I'm connecting my own body to the history of abuse that women have had over the decades, romantic abuse, sexual abuse. And I specifically was actually looking at classical paintings, right, because as a kid, I always have loved art, and I would look at these like beautiful classical paintings like in museums. They're in history books, like we learned about some of them in school. And I was like, oh my God, these are so lovely, like so awesome, and made by these famous painters. It's like the first thing you really hear about as an artist, these famous painters. Right. And later I found out a lot of them were depicting like women literally being like kidnapped and right, like abused. And I was, thought that was like pretty messed up. So I wanted to kind of comment on how that history, it still affects women today because of sexism, and those attitudes are so ingrained in our society. And I created that connection using the projections. And I kind of followed through with like the theme of like sexual violence and some of my other personal work because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm really passionate about women's issues. And that's something else I explore in the What He Left Behind series. I actually started that when I was when I moved to New York City. And I wasn't really done yet with like, I guess, telling these stories. So I started producing, literally all those photos actually were taken in my apartment, in my room, like in my bedroom of my apartment. And that's the same actually that I did with the Reframing History series. Most of those were taken in my college like apartments, like bedroom that I lived in. And that's like I liked, doing these self-portraits there because it's so personal. Right. And obviously like there's the connection to like assault and sexual assault and basically like the invasion of like your space, your body, like your privacy. And that's why I chose the bedroom as like the space to do this shoot. And that is an ongoing series, but it's funny, I haven't worked on it recently, unfortunately. And I think a big reason is because something I found out is like once you start doing like photography as a job, you start doing fashion photography or whatever it is, there's not as much time to shoot your personal projects. Right. Which is really, I think, why artists do residencies and that sort of thing. I have now found out the reason.
You're like, now it's like, oh no. You come home like tired from doing like all these shoots, and now you're like, I'm supposed to do it today, I'll do it tomorrow. And you keep putting it off and putting it off.
Exactly.
When you realize it's been like 2 weeks or you're putting it off.
Exactly. It's funny too, because I think that like there's a season for different things. And I'm an introvert actually. So I feel like one of the things I learned about living in New York City especially is like if you give everything your all the time, if you're like doing all these things all the time and you're on all the time, like as an introvert, I would burn out so fast. Like I would have no energy to do anything. Like I would just crash. Right. So I found that like I have to really like be mindful about where I expend my energy. And I would say the past few years, it's really been with my fashion photography and like building up that and building up like my practice, like my portfolio, my connections, trying to get jobs and that sort of thing. And really all of my energy and like my everything has gone into that it hasn't left a lot of room for me to produce like my own personal creative content. And I do sometimes feel guilty about that. Like, oh, as an artist, I should be producing more personal work. But then I realize, like, I will do that eventually. Like, I just have to give myself the time and the space, and it has to be that the moment is right to do it.
It's like you can't push like personal works out like that, because it's like you have to be like, you're putting a piece of yourself in there and you don't feel ready to do it, then it's not gonna have the same meaning that you want it
Exactly.
to.
And it just becomes exhausting then, and like
and
not
like work,
sincere.
like,
it's like insincere then.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, what do you think is currently the biggest problem in the industry, like specifically towards like the photography side of it?
Oh man, it's a loaded question. Yeah, so towards the photography side, I would say I've seen a lot of disrespect for photographers in the form of fair rates, especially. I've actually heard a lot of photographers talking about this, especially older ones who've been in the industry for a while, about how the rates have gotten so low compared to what they used to be. And people just don't really want to pay. Like, they don't want to pay really like what they should, because it's not just, obviously pressing a button on a camera. There's so much more that goes into it than that. And it's hard. It's actually it's a creative field, but it's a hard job, and it's sad to see that. I'm not really sure why the rates have gotten so low. Haven't really looked into it or like thought about it too hard, but I feel like part of it too has to do with times changing, and like we're in such a digital age where everyone has an iPhone. A lot of people think like, oh, like, taking photos on my iPhone is just as good as the DSLR, and the iPhone does have a pretty good quality camera. I will say that. And some photographers do shoot with iPhones, and that's fine. But there is a difference between like a random person pulling out an iPhone who like isn't really thinking about what they're doing, and a true like artist or photographer like really putting thought into it. And that skill really is part of what a client is paying for.
Yeah, it's not so much of like the DSLR, the camera and the iPhone. It's the person who's holding the iPhone. That's what makes the difference. Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, so I feel like for most freelancers or like people like in the industry, I feel like the rates have gone down. Like,
no paid internships. It's crazy. Yeah, when I was applying for jobs here when I first moved to the city, there were like I saw no paid internships. And the first job I took was unpaid. And technically a lot of that is actually illegal.
Yeah, it is.
I found out and people, I will say the industry does not look happily on that. Like I know a lot of photographers who are like, that's messed up. Like, you should pay your interns, but it's not happening, and it should be.
Yeah, it's always like the directors, they're like, oh, it makes me laugh because I'm just like get to like group of interns and I'm with them and they're like, oh yeah, I got paid for transportation. And some girls are like, I can't believe we didn't get paid anything. And she's like, I got transportation money. And I'm like, you got transportation money? I didn't even get that. Like,
oh my God, exactly. Or it's like, I had my meals covered. It's like, I didn't get that either. Like, oh my God, there's always something.
Yeah, I don't know why it's so widespread. I feel like even the makeup artists are getting really bad rates too. So it's kind of like, I've spoken to makeup artists who are like, oh, like they have a lot of followers and stuff like that, and they've done a lot of work, but it's like, how much are you getting paid? And they're like, this is just for like credit. This is like, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
Just for exposure.
Like, yes, exposure. I'm like, what? You've done like every magazine, like every small magazine out there. Why are you here for free?
Why is it for exposure? Exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because, a lot of people say like, oh, you just have to stop taking those jobs. And like,
but they're all those jobs.
Exactly.
Like, they're the only job out there.
To like a certain extent, like, yeah, you should, like, you get to a point where you have to like not take the unpaid jobs. But if it's a really good opportunity, it can be hard to say no.
Yeah,
if it's,
for some brands,
if it's
like,
right.
You have to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because some of those exposure opportunities are really good opportunities, and they will look great in your portfolio. But it's all about like really, it's such a personal thing. That's what's hard about like freelance, I feel like, and about the creative industries and photography and all of this, is that there's no like guide, there's no roadmap on like what you should do. If you go to med school or law school, like obviously that's very hard. I'm not saying it's not, but there's like certain steps you take, like you graduate, you do this or that, and then eventually, you clerk or whatever, and you end up in the field that you were going for all along, and you end up with like a certain salary that's like estimated. It's more consistent, and you do have like a clear end point. Usually, about how many years it will take. Yeah. But with freelance and with the creative industries and the art industry, it's so funny because there is none of that. It's a crazy thing. We just kind of like stumble into it. At least that's how I feel. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? Is this the right path? And really, like, only time will tell, and that can be a scary thing.
Yeah, it's like, I know kids who graduated, they did masters and everything, and they're still looking. And then there's kids who dropped out of school because they got a job before they graduated.
Oh my gosh.
So it's kind of like, oh my God, like
that would be the dream.
Yeah,
to get the great job before you even graduate.
Yeah, there's kids who they're like, oh yeah, I'm on my second year, but I'm gonna drop out because I already work for like, I don't know, Fendi or something. And I'm like,
oh my goodness.
What?
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah.
Everyone has their own pace too, I think, which is interesting. Like, it's hard not to compare yourself to people like that, but then you realize like my time will come too, and a lot of it is just having faith that things will work out, which can be difficult. Yeah, it can be hard at times, if you're not someone necessarily who believes that like, there's some like divine intervention or whatever at work. It can be difficult to maintain that sort of optimistic thinking.
Yeah, you take it more as if I'm not doing enough, and not just sometimes it just didn't align for you, I guess. And
yeah, exactly.
So like, what is something you wished you knew before starting as like this career path?
That's a good question too. Something I wish I knew before starting. I feel like, yeah, that's interesting. I feel like if I could talk to my younger self, really to a lot of young creatives, I would say like, be prepared for the fact that it's going to be really hard. It will be very difficult. It's not clear, like I was saying earlier, there's not a clear path. There's not a clear guideline for how to succeed. And it's going to be really challenging to have faith in yourself and to have that confidence that's taken me a long time. I'm still working on it, of course. Everyone is, I think, really, to some extent, having confidence in yourself and believing that eventually you will get to where you want to go. And I feel like I would just say, find a way to build that up within yourself and to prepare yourself. And honestly, a lot of what helped me was self-reflection, doing my own personal art, and going to therapy. I think everyone should go to therapy, honestly. It's an amazing thing. Like it really will enrich your life, and I think help people find out like why they do the things they do. And that really impacts your entire life, like including your career.
Yeah, definitely. Like also I feel like a lot of people should go in knowing, like, I feel like in movies, the industry is portrayed as being a little toxic. But it's like, let me tell you, it kind of is. So,
it is kind of toxic.
You should be ready you are going to be put in experiences that you are not going to feel comfortable
Absolutely.
in, but you should find the group of people that makes you feel
make you feel the best and that are doing what you want to do. And that is so important. And that is possible too. Like although it can be very toxic and it's very hard, and there will be people who don't like what you're about, who don't like what you do. There are always people who will like you and will like what you're about, and finding them is so important. And that really carries you through all the bad times.
Right. So just to wrap up, is there anything that you want to plug in? Anything coming up?
Ooh. Oh, I actually have a lot of things like kind of in the works. Some new projects I've recently shot since things started to open back up with COVID and it's getting safer to shoot. I've done some socially distanced shoots that will be dropping soon within the next few months. So keep an eye out for them at V Kluiters Photo on Instagram. That's VKLUITERS Photo. And I'll be releasing some new series soon.
Okay, cool. So thank you so much for being on. It was really great talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it. So maybe we can have you back in the future, like to see what
I would love
to,
that.
An update.
See what's happening in the future with Future Virginia and the progress I've made, hopefully.
Exactly. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.